Dragon's Dogma 2 is something that I've been watching closely. I think that it's probably a game that starts a little slower, but after a few weeks, maybe even just days, but after a few weeks, I think we start to see a lot of like TikToks, YouTube shorts, YouTube videos and stuff on the game starting to get more and more traction. And I think this is a game that probably does even better as word of mouth carries it. I think that that's where this game is going to really pop off. Kind of like with Pal World, where like, yeah, Pal World came out and people like did some little reviews on it, but not many. It was word of mouth that really sold that game. People being like, dude, you got to try this. This is awesome. And co-op is part of it. And it was a cheaper game. That's part of it. So that's really beneficial for them. But I think that similar things are going to happen with Dragon's Dogma 2. That being said, a lot of people have been watching it just like me. And now IGN is offering 10 hours of gameplay informed opinions. So we'll see what they're going to say about it.
Mitchell Saltzman here alongside Casey DeFreitas from all the way across the country. How you doing, Casey?
I'm good. How are you? Happy to be here.
I'm doing great too. And so I figure what we can do here is tie a little bow on our coverage of Dragon's Dogma 2. We did a gameplay reveal, we've done interviews, we've done a preview, but what we haven't really done is just done a conversation to talk about the 10 hours that we spent at Capcom in Japan playing Dragon's Dogma 2. So Casey, why don't you kick us off? Tell us a little bit about what we played.
I always love when we have the opportunity to do this for previews where you basically start from the beginning of the game and then you can just play and see how far you get. I think it really gives you a better sense of what the gameplay loop is going to be like rather than playing like bits and pieces of the game like chosen for you, you know? And like 10 hours, it's a incredibly long time to be able to get a handle of what the game is. And for Dragon's Dogma 2, we didn't start immediately from the actual beginning, but maybe 10 or 15 minutes into the game. The story starts right off the bat. You have amnesia, you don't know who you are, but you are probably the Arisen because pawns listen to you and you're able to summon your main pawn at the Riftstone right off the bat. So that's kind of where we started. And then you need to go to the city of Vermund to prove you either are or are not the Arisen, but everyone keeps it on the down low. And right off the bat, you meet someone who becomes your kind of connection to the city. I think his name is Brant. And he's the one who introduces you with the quests and with what is going on in the world.
Yeah.
My only concern with the game is in these like cinematic, like cutscene type things with human NPCs and stuff. It seems that there's not just a stiffness, but there is something graphically going on where like, I don't know if it's just the capture is slow or if the frame rate actually does like chug and plummet. I don't really know, but something is just a little off visually. When you're out playing the game and actually doing the gameplay, it looks great. But when you actually like look at this stuff, it seems much more stiff and stuttery at the same time.
And he's the one who introduces you with the quests and with what is going on in the world.
Yeah, and it's kind of like in the first game where your connection to Brant kind of ties you into the main quest. So every time you want to go do the main quest, you talk to Brant. He has a selection of main quests that you can choose to follow, and it's cool to have that separation of like this is clearly the main quest, and then everything else is clearly side content.
So
one of the things that I think is really impressive about Dragon's Dogma 2 is how everything feels very natural and organic in terms of like how you get side quests, how how you explore the world, and we'll talk a little bit more about the improvement.
Yeah, even this though, like look at this. Did you guys see it? Watch this, okay? Look over here. Look over here. Watch my mouse pointer.
World, and we'll talk a little bit more about the improvements, I think.
Yeah, these are the things that kind of worry me in the same way with like Rise of the Ronin. I think there are some concerning things with data streaming and management, and it seems like in city environments,
and we'll talk
the game starts to really struggle, where characters just spawn out of thin air. Not even that far. I mean, he's literally standing next to another NPC who's loaded in properly. So that worries me that this is what the game is currently running like. Now, it could be that it polishes up just fine, but that does worry me because that type of thing can be really distracting and disorienting all at the same time. Yes, it is also targeting 30 on console. That is something I think is important to, yeah, it's magic. It's not a bug, it's a feature. It is targeting 30 on console, and I think that's important to be clear with upfront, because for some people in recent years, they've decided to just not bother with the game if it runs at 30 on console. That's up to you. That's a matter of personal preference. I, for example, can't play first-person shooters at 30, so if there's a first-person game at 30, like, chances are I'm going to get super motion sick. I just really struggle with them. Sometimes I can struggle bust through them, but usually not. With third-person games, it doesn't really bother me that much. Third-person shooters maybe, but it doesn't bother me a ton. Now, as for PC, the expectation, I don't know if they've confirmed it, but they have not said that there's any frame caps on PC. I don't know why there would be. The only time I've seen frame caps on PC are for games that are like sprite-based, or in other cases, games that like their engine's AI system or animation systems are tied to that. So like notably From Software games, they can't run over 60 on PC because there's all sorts of like issues where their AI is tied to the frame rate. So like they evaluate their environment, the AI does every 15 frames or something. And so if you add extra frames, then they start evaluating their environments too frequently. And so then the AI breaks because they're basically reevaluating things twice the speed. You know, it causes all sorts of things to break. When you assume there's going to be only 60 frames in a second max, then it's like, okay, evaluate your environment 4 times a second. Not that bad. We can kind of balance things around that. But if you all of a sudden are doing 240 frames a second, things start to break. And you can't do that because now the guy's evaluating his environment like once every, you know, like 10th of a second, 12th of a second, like 18th of a second. Like it starts to really break down and all of a sudden he's just freaking out and twitching all over. So you have to really have a good excuse, in my view, to have a cap on frame rate on PC. You can still have a great game though. Like Elden Ring was capped at 60 on PC and it still is a great game on PC. Is there much reason to play it on PC over console at that point? Not really. Like it's, maybe you can crank a couple other bells and whistles. You can mod it and stuff, but at that point, there's not much of a reason. In this case, though, I don't think they've said anything that would suggest there's going to be anything like that.
Even I think of Dragon's Dogma 2 over the first game from what we've seen, but I want to kind of go back a little bit and just talk a little bit more about the story and how like that initial story hook is so strong. Right from the start, you know what you're doing, you know what the state of the world is. Everything feels a lot more kind of built up right from the start. It's not being built as it goes. You kind of get the full scope of the world right from the beginning, and it kind of grounded me more in the plot of Dragon's Dogma 2. More so.
There's also, as you can see, this is a really low resolution capture for one. So the game looks really, really blurry compared to what it should be. And also at the same time, it looks as though they have like a dynamic resolution scaler running in addition to like FSR2. And what that means is that when you get into really busy combat encounters, things just start to look blurry like crazy. Like it really takes a nosedive, which is really, really unfortunate for console players. Because I mean, already 30 FPS for high intensity, high octane combat encounters is kind of on the low end, but to then have the frame rate or the resolution and frame rate potentially dip even further when things get crazy and when you need that clarity all the more, that could be a problem. That could be a real problem. So I think with a lot of this stuff, my biggest concern is performance, and seeing like the captures they have stuttering so much, that really concerns me. That on console, this might be a wee bit of a mess. The game could be great. That would be one way for this to just tank, is if it's just super broken on console and you can't really do much high intensity combat without frame dips. I really hope that's not the case, but I'm seeing a lot of stuff like that.
Location system in this game, because we did experience that differently. Because I ended up playing as warrior, fighter, and sorcerer, and you spent the entirety of your time playing as a thief. And so because none of our coverage really covered the thief, I really wanted to dive into your thoughts on the thief as a class and what you thought about it.
I really enjoyed the thief. So in the original Dragon's Dogma, I played as a strider, which allowed you to use both the bow and arrow and I wanted to say dual blades, but daggers, two daggers. And in Dragon's Dogma 2, they split that class into both the archer and the thief, because I I think there was a quote that they said that class was a little bit too strong for a base starting class. There is another class, Mystic Spearhand, that you'll be able to unlock eventually that does have long range and close range capabilities, but I guess for a base class, they wanted to make it a little bit more basic. But I still felt very capable immediately from the get-go. You're immediately given core skills that are already on your map, so they are on your face buttons rather. And I felt able to go in and out of combat very agilely, very quickly, and I felt I felt like a rogue. Like it was just, that's just how it is. And you eventually unlock well, you already have an ability from the get-go called Twin Daggers, which if you sneak up or if a enemy does not perceive you and you hit them with that attack, it does more damage. That's very rogue-like, right? Very thief-like. And then you unlock additional skills for one that lets you kind of like cover yourself in mud and lower your enemy's ability to perceive you, which makes it easier to get that extra damage bonus from sneaking up on them with the Twin Daggers. And it became very, it reminded me of what I would do as a rogue in a D&D campaign, where I would do that move to kind of cover me and then trying to sneak up behind the group of enemies while the rest of my party engage them in combat so I can get off those sneak attacks. And it was a really fun class the whole time. It works a little bit differently than the Strider. With the Strider, I assume everyone else did this, but I kind of really abused the Helm Splitter attack, which deals more damage if you are attacking from above. But the move this time around works a little bit differently, where it launches you really high up into the air. So if you're attacking something that's smaller, you're not getting all of the hits off, so you can't really rely on that one move to deal your damage the way I did in the original Dragon's Dogma. But this encourages you to experiment with other moves and new moves, and there's so much to choose from and there's a lot of options and a lot of customizability, even just for the thief.
And every vocation now has a vocational ability that's tied to them.
Yes.
So what's unique about the thief is that they are the only class that I've seen so far that actually has a dodge button.
It's the quick step.
Right, they have a quick step. And I don't know if it has iframes, but even if it doesn't, just the ability to quickly get out of the way of attacks is a huge benefit to that class. Because if you want to get out of the way real quickly of something as a warrior, you basically have to just start a sprint. And it's tough. But yeah, so to kind of talk about the vocations I played, Fighter felt probably the most similar to everything else that or to how the Fighter was in the first game. The big thing about the Fighter is that they are the only class that has a shield, at least again as far as I know so far. So you can use a shield to parry attacks. They have very, very strong melee capabilities. There's a new system in the game where if you basically stun an enemy with repeated melee attacks, you open them up to an execution that just instantly kills them. And I believe it also gives you some invulnerability while you're in the middle of the execution animation. There's like this really good hit stop effect. It feels really good. And then you have the Warrior. The Warrior was, I know, there was a lot of people talking about my Warrior gameplay and how it wasn't very good. For the record, that was very early game Warrior gameplay. I didn't have a lot of skills. There's some footage later on that hopefully I can cut in some B-roll of right now. But the big thing about the Warrior, to prove that I'm not that bad at this game. No, but the Warrior, I think the really cool thing about this class is that yes, it's a class that's focused on slow hits or charged up really powerful hits. That you can kind of just, bully through light attacks and just, take a few to do one big shot of your own. But the big new thing about it is that there's an ability you get much later in the vocation that allows you to time button presses with your attacks. And so if you time an attack press just as your attack hits, you'll instantly go into your next attack. And you can keep that chain going, so you're just going you're just cutting through things like this if you're able to time it. And you deal huge damage because, again, the Warrior is a class that's all about big damage but slow attack. But then they also have this skill that lets them, negate some of that disadvantage if you're able to properly time those attacks. And it felt really good. I was cutting through some bosses.
Poor guy, he's on
and
fire.
I love the warrior
won't
class.
leave him be.
One of the things I always say about Dragon's Dogma Dragon's Dogma Vocations, excuse me, is that they are kind of the peak fantasy of these well-known archetypes. So, the warrior is the peak fantasy of that gut style character that has a great sword and it's just like charging it up for like 10 seconds, and then he releases it and just it's like an explosion happens without any kind of fire or explosion effects. It feels that powerful when you hit it. And then you have the sorcerer who charges up a spell for like 25 seconds, and when you release that spell, it looks like a spell you charged up for 20 something seconds. And then you have the thief who is darting back and forth doing these really quick attacks, gets extra damage for
it. Does feel like it's actually very different per class that you play, and that is what you want. You want it to feel truly distinct, and that adds replay value, that adds versatility. I love it.
Freely change your vocations, which is fantastic. I feel like usually I'm like sweating when I'm choosing my original vocation or class or whatever in games, because it's like, oh, this is it. This is all I'm going to get. But in Dragon's Dogma, you can always be like, you know what? I'm kind of tired of being a thief. I'm going to be a mage, and then go and change your vocation. And of course, you have to build up those points and levels again to make your mage class as strong as your thief class was. But it's still a very doable endeavor. I'm thinking of like Final Fantasy 14 that also allows you to kind of master everything if you wanted to. It's not quite that intensive.
Yeah. One other thing that I think we should clarify, you have those 4 base classes, and then you have the advanced versions of those classes. But the way you get those advanced versions of those classes is not by leveling up the base class. You actually get a quest that sends you to find the weapon of that class, and you bring it back to the vocation master, basically, and then you unlock that vocation. I don't know if that's the case for everything. We only got to unlock the warrior and sorcerer vocations in our playtime. The trickster was a special build that they just teleported us to, basically.
Yeah.
So we don't know.
That was a very
exactly
high level.
Yeah.
I think it was maxed out. We got to play maxed out trickster.
I don't know if every single thing was maxed out. We had like the highest versions of the skills that we had equipped. So like the move that sends out a fog that gets you aggro.
Suffocating Shroud.
Suffocating Shroud. That probably had like the max range on it. When you first start off with the trickster, that might not have as wide a radius. We don't exactly know how all the other vocations will be unlocked. If they are the same as the warrior and sorcerer, it seems like you do a quest, you bring back a weapon to the vocation master, and then you unlock the vocation. We didn't get to play any Mystic Spearhand, which was a bummer for me, but we did get a good quote from Itsuno-san that basically was saying that the class is, they like to call it Akuma balancing at Capcom, where it's focused on dealing big damage, but at the expense of taking a lot, or like having very little, life. It's basically a glass cannon build, and I'm very excited for that one. That's probably the one I'm gonna, try out when I first get my hands on this game.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that as well. I had a Blade Song wizard character in D&D, and it kind of looks like it plays like a Mystic Spearhand. So I'm very curious and checking out what that feels like in a game.
Moving on from vocations, I wanted to double back a little bit about the exploration, because as we talked about, I feel like there are two schools of open world design. You've got the Assassin's Creed style of design, where you just put everything on a map, and the player gets to go to every marker and feel like, okay, I've done everything in this area. I've crossed off all the side quests. I've done all the minor collectibles. I can move on to something else. And then there's kind of this emerging school of like Elden Ring and Breath of the Wild, where the map is pretty barren, and it's on you to kind of fill in the markers as you find stuff. And Dragon's Dogma definitely goes more towards the new school of like Elden Ring and Breath of the Wild, but also it adds kind of its own little spin to it because there's very limited fast travel in this game. Casey, what did you think about how the distance works in this game and how how much you have to work to get from point A to point B?
I found it so interesting how much the developers emphasize the importance of distance in their game whenever they talk to us. I think their first introduction, they talk to us about how they want us to feel the difficulties of long distance relationships, or like getting to, like, do you want to go, I think one of the things they said, like, do you want to go to a restaurant that's closer to you is not as good, or do you want to spend the extra time or money getting to a place that's really good, and if that will be worth it to you. And their goal was to make the travel worth it despite the cost or risk, as you said, Mitchell.
I think it's an interesting challenge for a developer to put on themselves, is to limit fast travel, because I do agree that often fast travel can just be kind of like a band-aid on an uninteresting world. It's like, okay, so you don't want to run from point A to point B because that'll be boring. Like, you'll just be running and you'll just be riding your horse or whatever, and it's just going to be you turn your brain off and you just go, and that's going to be boring, so you want to fast travel to skip that. That to me, I think, is a reflection of a poorly designed world where you don't want to explore it yourself and traverse it yourself. I think if your world is truly interesting and beautiful and captivating in various ways, players, even if there is fast travel, should want to go and explore on foot freely. And I think that, Bethesda games are better when you don't let yourself fast travel. I think Assassin's Creed games are better when you don't let yourself fast travel. I think most of these games are better if you can put on that artificial limitation to yourself. Now, sometimes they've designed the game assuming you're just going to fast travel back and forth, and there are some limitations. Like, of course, with The Witcher 3, you can't just run from White Orchard to Skellige. There is a load screen or two between those, so you are limited in that sense. But with a lot of these games, I think if you can push yourself to just explore for the sake of exploring, you'll find yourself having a really good time. It can be really cool. Drinner, thank you.
Drinner D donated $10 through Super Chat. So, I'm gonna say it. Still seeing very bland, auto-generated, looking, minimally textured environments, and stiff and clunky animations that plagued the first game. Hope it looks better at launch.
I think the stiff and clunky animations and the awkward NPC interactions, I think those are just going to be here. That's going to be it. But those are hopefully not the reason you're playing the game. It will affect people's perception of it. I think cinematics are not going to be the strength here. So I absolutely agree there. As for the environments, it's really, really freaking hard to tell right now, because 99% of the gameplay footage we've been getting are through outlets like IGN and GameSpot and places like that. And it seems like they've only received 1080p captures of their gameplay. Like, is there a daytime sequence coming up that I can pull as an example? Like, there are just sections here where this is not even approaching 1080p. And I don't think this is a 4K capture. I think this is, especially when you look at the text and the compression artifacting on the text, to me, this suggests this is a problem of a capped resolution at the outset. So I think that they are only letting them capture it in 1080p, and even then it's a really low bitrate 1080p. And as a result, the game looks really blurry and flat, even though it's not necessarily blurry and flat. There are also weird upscaling artifacts. I agree that's still present here. And so the combination makes the game, I think, look way worse than it probably does when you're playing it. We've seen this before. There's been other games where they've done preview events this way and limited capture resolutions. And I think it's because, like, the guys that set up the captures are not necessarily like part of the marketing teams or any content creators or anything, so they don't realize that that's going to hold it back in that way. Yeah, all of this to say, I guess, to wrap up the Dragon's Dogma 2 thing, I think the game looks really promising. I do worry about some of that stuff with, like, pop in, the low resolution stuff worries me. Like if we look at the main trailers that they've put out, the official trailers and stuff, there's footage that looks way sharper and definitely looks way better than anything we've seen in those previews. Like this looks really cool, but I think it's because they're like actually capturing it at max resolution, high bit rates, and it looks way better. I just think whoever is managing their preview events, like they're screwing up the captures. And I'm not telling them this to be like mean. I'm saying if you want the game to look better to the mass media and the mass public, you gotta crank the fidelity on those captures because it makes the whole game look super blurry, super like flat and poorly textured. And I see this and this looks way better. You know, I see this looks better. But the footage that I've seen in the preview events are all super flat and clunky. Maybe this is just running on a high-end PC and that's why it looks better. And the other stuff was running on console. I don't know. But I would really encourage them to take an extra look at their capture setup because I feel like there's a real flatness going on. Other than that, I think the gameplay looks solid. I think it has a lot of potential, and I'm hoping that they can pull it off, but it's going to be something to keep an eye on for sure, I think. He took my thing! Red flag!